Do we have too much government?
You need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome back, and welcome back to a return guest, always an interesting guest, Representative Joe Atkins from District 52B. And Joe was one of the youngest mayors in the country as the mayor of Inver Grove Heights. And about 12 years ago, he decided he wanted to do something else, so he ran for the legislature. He has decimated his opposition in 6 elections, now running for his 7th term, one of the leaders of the legislature and one of the most influential members of the legislature, and yet he comes back here.
Well, and hopefully I haven't decimated my opposition, Alan. I try to run for the office rather than against my opposition, but it's gone pretty well.
Based on this year's advertising, that would be refreshing.
Yeah, isn't this, I mean...
It's been just horrendous this year, the depth to which some of these candidates have stepped.
I don't think I've
ever
seen anything quite like this. And we've seen some nasty campaigns over the years and some tight elections, but nothing quite like this. And you're not seeing any of that from me, I might add.
No, in fact, seeing nothing from you. Haven't seen big newspaper ads, haven't seen television ads.
No,
and,
I just, for me it's really, they call it retail politics. I like actually talking with individuals, just going door to door, finding out what concerns people have in the district and going from there.
Well, you run on your record. Let's talk about that record. Let's talk about some of the things that were accomplished in the last session of the legislature, the 19 bills that you authored, to say nothing of all the ones that you co-sponsored, and some of the things that were accomplished in this last session.
This was a good session. This was probably the most productive session that I've ever been a part of. From all day, every day, voluntary kindergarten, to balancing the budget without any of the shifts and gimmicks. In fact, one of the most amazing things to me was, the 2 years prior, and I didn't vote for it, but there was a borrowing from our schools, about $2.8 billion.
Billions of dollars,
Billions
right.
of dollars. That's pretty soon you're talking a lot of money.
Yeah.
That was used to balance the last state budget. The previous time that had occurred, early in the 1990s, it took 15 years to pay that loan back. And this time we did it immediately. We just thought it was the wrong way to go, to borrow from kids to pay for the state budget issues. So when we took control, when
the money was borrowed from the kids, as you put it, what happened is the homeowners in our district and in many others got hit with levies to pay for the money that the school district should have had.
Yeah, there were any number of school districts that ended up with cash flow issues, and you had, I think the number was, there were over 230 levies, school levies, in the prior 2 years. And this fall, there's I want to say it's 33. So we've tried to, rather than put all of the burden on the school districts, we've tried to actually reverse that trend, help our school districts, help our teachers, help our school boards, so that we're not seeing all of these school referendums every fall.
Now, I know you're very involved in healthcare. Let's talk about healthcare in Minnesota, which is, by reputation, the best in the nation. And yet, I've seen some scurrilous ads about costs of healthcare, things like that.
I was going to say, by the way, it's not by reputation. It's by actual empirical evidence that we have the best
Well, that's how
healthcare
you get the
system
reputation.
anywhere in the country. But yeah, we've also, in addition to having the best healthcare, we've also got the lowest insurance rates of any state in the country. And it does trouble me a little bit. Both sides, I think, try to spin the numbers a little bit, and what's the average increase and all of this. What I always tell people to do is just look at the rates yourself. Go online, go to whether it's MNsure, or if you don't buy through MNsure and you buy directly through an agent or through a company, and then compare that rate. And all you got to do is look next door, for example, in Wisconsin, where the rates are 85% higher than they are here in Minnesota.
Well, Wisconsin is in big trouble in several areas, and that being one of them. They also have run themselves into a deficit by cutting taxes to a ridiculous degree.
Well,
It comes back to
they're
haunt
struggling.
you.
They are struggling, and I wouldn't wish bad things on. As much as I like to taunt my friends across the Wisconsin line, they really are struggling. They're having a tough time getting going again, and we're sitting right across. I mean, there's the only difference between the two states, other than football teams, I suppose, is
Theirs is a lot better than
theirs
ours
is
at
pretty
the moment,
good right now. But give us time. Teddy's coming. But there's just a river. For the most part, there's a lot of things that we have in common, and we sit here in Minnesota. We've got the 5th fastest growing economy in the country. 8th best state for business. Wisconsin, I think, was ranked 41st, and not by some liberal organization, but by Forbes magazine, kind of a conservative
And
group.
we sit here in Eagan, which has been picked again for the 10th year in a row as one of the best small cities in the country to live in.
Yeah, a lot to be proud of. And but that doesn't just happen by accident. I mean, that was, as much as I'd like to sit here and take credit just over the last 2 years, you literally look back over generations of folks, and not just in politics or in government, business leaders that have stepped up, talked about issues like early childhood education, and not made it into a political volleyball.
Well, let's talk about these things in a little bit more depth. Early childhood education. Is there such a thing as all-day kindergarten?
There's been all-day kindergarten for some time. It was just, unfortunately, we talk about achievement gap issues, which maybe we want to talk about a little bit as well. But it came down to, could you afford it or not? And my wife and I were fortunate enough, we put all 3 of our kids through all-day kindergarten and found it invaluable. I mean, just what a wonderful opportunity. But it cost us some money to do that. And there's lots of families that couldn't afford it. So now in this last session, we provided so that everybody can have that opportunity. And it doesn't matter what your financial means are.
And it's been proven time and again, statistically, that makes a big difference in educational progress.
An enormous difference. And it doesn't just make a difference for that particular kid. It makes a difference for the whole classroom, because as any teacher will tell you, if they've got kids that are falling behind, that aren't able to keep up with everybody else, they're going to spend the lion's share of their time with those kids that are a little bit behind. Well, as a result, then you've got kids that are ready, and they're ready to move forward. They're being held back as a result of having to teach the kids who are a little bit behind. If you can move that entire group forward, it's amazing. And there's again empirical evidence that demonstrates the value of all-day kindergarten and even earlier options for kids.
Healthcare. You talked about the fact that it's the best and the cheapest in the country. Why? What do we have? What did we do?
Well, again, you've got to give some credit where it's due to folks that have been at this for some time. I mean, Minnesota didn't just wake up one day and have the best healthcare system in the country. There have been all sorts of folks, both private sector and public sector, that have been working together for decades, generations, to build a terrific system. And then one of the things that we've done of late, and MNsure had kind of a rocky start now, and
Yes, it did, but
it was
actually not as bad as the Affordable Care Act, I think.
No. But the thing that MNsure did for the very first time was it caused health insurers to compete on an apples-to-apples basis. You could literally go online on your computer and see the same type of plan priced out for you. With whatever the network was going to be, where if you'd be able to keep your doctor, all the various elements that are important to you, and then you could price them. And when you make folks in that transparent fashion health insurers compete for business, it drove down prices. And that was the impact here. We saw the same impact in other states that adopted it. It just was in Minnesota we happened to see the lowest rates in the country.
And what it didn't do, it didn't drive the private sector out of business. If anything, it enhanced the business that the private sector has done.
Actually, it's kind of funny to hear people talk about this as government-provided health insurance or health care or something like that. It isn't that at all. All that MNsure does is create a market. It's kind of like Target, where we've got a number of products that come in and they're put on the shelf, but we don't actually own the product, I shouldn't say we don't own we don't create that product. We give people a chance to shop among those various products and decide which one's best for them.
Upcoming session of the legislature, what do we have to look forward to?
Well, you know what? Honestly, it kind of depends. If Democrats are in control, and I don't want to make this into a big partisan debate, but the two parties have a little different set of priorities and how they would go about addressing those priorities. Democrats are focused on continuing. We froze college tuition the last 2 years. There's a hope to be able to do that for an additional 2 years. We've improved education funding. We hope to be able to do that again over the next 2 years. Transportation is going to be a top shelf, top priority kind of issue. And I keep hearing from my Republican friends, and I really use the word friends genuinely, they want to reprioritize.
Well, you're one of those people who really works across the aisle.
Absolutely.
Yours is not an antagonistic relationship with the Republicans, and maybe that's why you're reaching for your 7th term here, and that's why you're one of the leaders in the legislature.
Well, and you know, quite honestly, it's just very practical. I also happen to like folks on both sides of the aisle, and I know their kids, and it's amazing what you can do when you'll just get up out of your seat, walk across, and both sides have good ideas. Just because one party happens to be in control doesn't mean they have a monopoly on all the good ideas. But there is a philosophical difference between the two sides, for example, with respect to transportation.
Yeah, you were talking about prioritizing things.
You know, the answer that I hear at forum after forum after forum among Republicans is, well, we'll just take less money or take money from transit and we'll spend it on roads. And the next sentence is the one that they don't want to talk about, which is that solves 1/12 of the problem, or 1/20th of the problem, depending on which set of facts you buy into. But it's even if you took every dollar, which frankly you can't because there's federal laws that also apply, but even if you took every dollar, it doesn't address Minnesota's ongoing needs, just simply for roads and bridge safety and bridge structural issues.
Which we're having a lot of and have had a lot of in the last few years.
We are, and you know what? We built a lot of roads 30, 40, 50 years ago, and a lot of bridges 30, 40, and 50 years ago. And we've done an okay job, but we have work to do. And it's a matter of, at some point, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for that. And there have been all kinds of different ideas, but that's a discussion Republican folks don't want to have.
Well, speaking of transportation, now, when former Governor Pawlenty was a legislator, sitting in the same chair that you're in a different location, we need new furniture, folks, by the way, but he was dead set against light rail, and we argued it back and forth. I felt that it really, really would be helpful to have the light rail. He did not. He opposed it. Then, when it came to cutting the ribbon, I was not invited, and he was right there, cut the ribbon. A year or two later, when light rail was doing so much better than anticipated, it was interesting to hear him take credit for being one of the people behind light rail. Wasn't the case. But the fact of the matter is we now have light rail from St. Paul to Minneapolis, and we're looking at rail in other areas.
Although that's a tricky issue. I understand, you know, and I appreciate Governor Pawlenty kind of coming around to light rail. He may not have been there originally, but I think he came some distance. He and I had a discussion about that some years ago, and I think there's one piece on which we definitely agree, and that is that light rail really its problematic. It's tricky in a community like the Twin Cities because we were not built densely like so many East Coast cities were, that were built on a horse economy or horse-based transportation system. We're much more spread out. So when it comes to light rail, we have to be more careful about where we put the light rail tracks. It's got to be in those densely populated corridors where it'll work. It's not quite as easy as it is out east.
It's hard to do, yeah. Well, when I was, I guess, a freshman in college, which is in the horse and buggy
About
days.
5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
500-600 years ago. My parents moved to Minneapolis. My father was with a retail chain and kept getting relocated, so we lived all over the country like military people would. But we were here, and when I first came home for vacation, I got on a streetcar and went to where we were living at the time. We tore up all the streetcar tracks and replaced them, and now people are talking about putting the streetcars back.
Everything old is new again. And it's an interesting discussion to have. It's definitely going to be a key part of the discussion in the 2015 session. Is how are we going to address these transportation needs that have us in the suburban areas, though, the Egans, the Inver Groves, we have a daunting road and bridge issue that's right here. And I expect that we'll have light rail, mass transit type discussion, but we can't lose sight of the fact that most people still travel via roads and bridges.
Well, we see Robert Street Bridge right now, where they've cut down the traffic on it, and the Lafayette Bridge, which I think is being replaced, and we had the 35W disaster. We have other bridges that are really in desperate need of repair or replacement.
The Lafayette Bridge, which was rated structurally more deficient than the 35W bridge that fell down. There are some, I don't want to call it a crisis per se. I'm not suggesting that we have a situation where bridges are going to fall down in the foreseeable future, but we do have very significant structural issues
We have
that
to
need to
pay
be addressed.
attention to them, and we have to have the funding to pay attention to them. And
Now that being said, though, when we talk about funding, I do anticipate that there's going to be a discussion about how we're going to pay for roads, how we're going to pay for transportation. But I do not anticipate, and this may surprise you a little bit, I don't anticipate any need for additional taxes. We are in a position now, part of it is because we've got the 5th fastest growing economy in the country, 8th best state for business. There's a lot of folks going back to work, 170,000 new jobs in the last 4 years. We've got more people working now in Minnesota than at any time in Minnesota history. So the revenues are coming in, and we actually anticipate into the out biennium a couple $2 billion surplus. So I think we're actually in pretty good shape tax-wise, and I don't anticipate a need for additional taxes.
plus our bonding costs are very good once again.
They are terrific.
Best.
We turned the corner again. Well, actually, they're the best they are, but for a while there, our credit rating was not so good.
That's right.
We had lost
under
our top.
a former administration where
Yeah.
we got cut back.
Yeah, but we're on sound ground again, and as a result of that, our borrowing costs when it goes to, and I don't like to borrow unless it's for projects that have a useful life that is decades long, and then it makes some sense. And if you're going to borrow, you definitely want to be able to borrow at the lowest interest rates that you can. And in Minnesota, we're able to do that again.
And interest rates right now are as low as they have been in a very long time.
To the point where they're almost paying us to borrow money. I've never seen interest rates quite like this, and which is good because we've passed some bills where we've had to do some bonding in order to pay for those projects, long-term useful life type projects, fixing things at college campuses and so forth, and we've been able to secure the lowest rates that we've had in a long time.
Now, as we sit here, the World Series is tied 1-1. Kansas City or San Francisco?
Oh, Kansas City. Small market team. If you're
We-
a Twins
we
fan,
agree
you better
on
be a
that.
Royals fan.
Yeah. You have to respect what they have accomplished in the last several years.
Yeah.
And
I
as
hope
you
that the
said,
Twins can
Vikings
use them as a model, perhaps.
manager, for the Twins?
Paul Molitor. Don't you think?
I
You got a
think
different prediction?
I would be very happy with Molitor, but I would love to see Doug Minkiewicz there.
Yeah.
Because he's got fire in his belly, and he's young, and he has a great track record for the last several years. And he was a great favorite of mine, not because I was a first baseman, but because he would sit on the floor of that filthy Metrodome dugout with his rally cap on, and really, really, with his intensity, I think
You know
that's
what
something
I
that
liked
could really
about him?
lead them.
He was a lunchbox kind of guy. You know, he had too challenging of a name to be a household name. But he came to work. He worked hard every day, worked on his craft. Didn't come in with the best set of skills,
No,
quite frankly, but really honed it, really worked at it.
As opposed to
he's a
Molitor,
model.
Molitor was a natural athlete.
He was. He also had the work ethic. People,
yeah.
people
He still
didn't-
does,
he-
though.
yeah.
But
But Minkiewicz is, he didn't, obviously he had some serious talent, but not the kind that a Joe Mauer has or a Paul Molitor has. And he worked at it every day. And he's
Joe who?
Yeah, our neighbor. he lives just a mile over here, you know.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going with Kansas City.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
So,
I mean,
and I'm
talk
sure-
about difference in payrolls also.
Yeah.
There's a big differential there.
But it just goes to show that that it's money isn't everything. You know, I mean, a lot of it is desire. It's hard work. It's having a good program. It's kind of like some of the approaches that we've tried to take here in Minnesota. We don't always, you know, the East Coast, West Coast, throw a lot of money at problems. We don't have that good fortune here in Minnesota. all
We
the
are
time.
a small market state,
Yeah.
and yet we have more Fortune 500 companies that have their offices here than per capita than any other state in the country. Now, there's got to be a reason for that. Why do they come here? Because they have the talent here, because of costs here, because this is really a great place to live.
I suspect there's probably few legislators that talk to more CEOs, just by virtue of the fact that I chair the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee. I talk with CEOs on a regular basis, and the number one issue that comes up again and again and again, almost to the exclusion of everything else, it's not taxes and it's not transportation, important issues, mind you, it's education. Again and again and again. And the focus that they have on an educated workforce, that is why they came here, that is why they're building here, that is why they're staying here. And it's any number of, you know, whether it's CHS or Thomson Reuters. We're sitting here at Thomson Reuters, CHS is just down the road. When they talk about why they're here, why they stay here, and what's important here, it's all about education.
Getting the caliber of people that they
Yeah.
need to be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else do we face in this session?
Well, we've the big three are always education, healthcare, and job creation. On the education front, I alluded to it briefly, is the college tuition freeze that was instituted 2 years ago. We did that just for public universities and colleges, and remarkably, then a number of the private folks followed suit. So we actually had, for the first time in an awfully long time, a period of time where students did not, and their families did not pay more for tuition, whether they went to a private school or a public school. And that issue of student debt and being saddled when these kids come out of college with $30, $40, $50, $80,
Al
$100,000
Franken talks
in debt.
about the average student has to carry $31,000.
Right. And they can't refinance.
That's the
it.
average.
And they can't refinance.
That's
you can
one of the
refinance
things that
everything else.
Franken is trying so hard to do, and he's got a great ad, not an attack ad, but really, they can't refinance their tuition debt, but they can refinance their house, they can refinance their car, and it makes such sense to me that they should be able to. Also, interest rates. They should have the lowest interest rate or no interest rate. I mean, as far as I'm concerned,
and
I'd like to
would.
see free college.
They would have the lowest interest rates if lenders had to compete for their business. But when they hold them like this and they can't shop it anywhere else other than just consolidating past loans, that doesn't give them the ability to drive that interest rate lower.
And you're right there. You've got college-age children.
I do, and so we're doing it just like any other family. The boys are working hard in the summertime, so they got skin in the game. Mom and Dad are helping out, and now we got Katie, who's a senior, number 3, who's going to be heading off to school next year. But this is one of those.
She's shooting high. She's looking at Notre Dame.
She's looking at Notre Dame. She's looking at Carleton. She's looking at all kinds of places that'll put Mom and Dad in the poorhouse. But she's a very accomplished young lady. So, but this is an issue where I would hope that across party lines we'd be able to work together. John Klein is in an absolutely wonderful position if he gets elected this fall to be able to drive this debate. And try to bring down interest rates.
He hasn't shown any interest in it.
He's not shown any interest at all yet. But there's Governor Pawlenty kind of came around on some issues, and I hold out hope for John Klein. Certainly, Mike Obermueller, if he gets elected, I know Mike Obermuller would push for it.
You're a better man than I, because I kind of lost that hope.
Well, I never give up on
many
anybody,
times, and. Then he didn't like the questions that I started to ask, and hasn't been back in a few years.
Well, what I like though about Mike Obermuller is that he's the one driving the agenda right now. He's talking about issues. I think he's spent a ton of time talking about this issue with respect to student debt.
Yes, he
has.
has.
By the way, it's not just important to families like mine. We're talking about young people who can't start families, who can't buy homes, who can't buy cars, because they are servicing
that
debt.
Homes is a very big part of it also.
Yeah, so when I talk to home builders, and they bring up the topic of student debt, it's not which you wouldn't ordinarily tie in with home builders, but obviously their interest is in making sure that they've got potential buyers, and if they're sending all of their money off to some bank in New Jersey that holds their student loan, and it's taken $1,000, $1,500 a month out of a household.
My
it's
daughter
a critical issue.
was into her 40s before she paid off her student loans.
Doesn't surprise me in the least, and
And,
we've got to reverse that trend. So, and I think actually I'm confident that I don't know. I'm again not trying to make this partisan. I don't know if that's a priority for Republicans. I do know absolutely that the college tuition freeze is a high priority for Democrats, and continuing it for another couple of years is going to be something that's going to happen 2015, 2016.
Well, we're talking, and we're just about out of time, with Joe Atkins, who has become, in 6 terms in the legislature, one of the leaders in so many respects, and who was also respected in so many respects. And I hear that from both sides of the aisle. So we wish you well in this 7th election, and who was won by as many as 75% of the vote in a couple of the past elections, but we take nothing for granted.
That's right.
So it's really important, particularly in this off year, that people get out and vote.
Absolutely.
And we can't afford to have another slack off year election, because the people that you elect are really the people that are going to direct your life, your finances, and your future. So we wish you good luck, Joe Atkins, and come back after the election and we'll talk some more.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.